Please unmute Denise.
I was the unmuted Reverend Denise Couch. Now I am the unmuted Reverend Denise Couch. Good morning. I use she, her pronouns, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to worship with the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Nashville. Because our developmental lead minister, the Reverend Diane Daugert, is on vacation this month, I have the added pleasure of introducing our guest speaker this morning. Many of you will remember Lóre Stevens as a member of First UU, but you may also remember that Lóre served on our staff as the membership coordinator a few years. And Lóre is now a rising third-year Harvard Divinity School student being sponsored by our congregation. While at Harvard, Lóre has received awards for demonstrated ministerial promise and for 2 different sermons, one of which was about our congregation's history, and the other of which we are going to hear this morning. We are so grateful that Lóre was able to take a break this morning from her chaplaincy internship to join us. As Unitarian Universalists, our spiritual paths vary, but in this congregation, we have made a covenant together. We affirm our interdependence, celebrate our differences, and work for justice. We are a welcoming congregation, and we deepen our relationships as we serve our congregation's mission to create community, nurture spiritual growth, and act on our values in the broader world, guided by reason and compassion. I'd like to extend a special welcome to visitors worshiping with us this morning. If you are seeking a spiritual home, we hope that you find it here. If you have questions about our congregation, please be in touch with me. You can find my email address in the staff directory under Contact Us on our website, and I look forward to hearing from you. If you are with us for the live broadcast of this service on Zoom, won't you please say hello in the chat? We love to hear from you that way. No matter what platform you're using to join us for worship, you can find helpful information like ways to give, faith development resources for all ages, our reopening plans, and more in the worship portal on our website, firstuunash.org. We are so glad you're joining us for worship.
My name is Jay Tiefenbrunn. My pronouns are she, her, and I am your director of music ministries. Our opening song is Mother Earth, Beloved Garden by UU composer Amanda Udis Kessler. I invite you into a sacred presence as this song invokes the 5 elements. Please join me, Holling, and singers from your choir in the singing.
To feed us, land to Good morning, everyone. It is so lovely to see you. This is our call to worship, and it is a reading, a poem called Love After Love by Derek Walcott. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, "Sit here, eat." You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life.
Good morning. I am Marguerite Mills, your Director of Lifespan Religious Education. My pronouns are she, her. And our chalice lighting this morning comes from the Reverend Leslie Takahashi. Despite distance and fear, we are connected. Despite loneliness and change, we are connected. Across different experiences and lives, we are connected. Even in the face of the inevitable losses of life, we are connected. When we wish to laugh, we are connected. When we need to mourn, we are connected. Across a nation divided, we are connected. Even when we dance alone in a room, we are connected. In the heat of the sun, we are connected. In the glow of the stars, we are connected. Across the limits of our imagination, we are connected. Even when nature trembles, we are connected. And our story this morning comes from Nora Dooley with a little bit of a tweak here and there. It had been raining for days, days and days and days, and it felt like weeks, months, more than a year it felt like. And Carrie was home where she had been, it seemed, for a very, very long time. Home with her mother and her little brother Anthony, and her mother was making her great-grandmother's Italian bread. Well, it was hard. It was hard for everyone being all in there together. And Anthony was poking Carrie, and Carrie would poke him right back. And their mother was just about at her limit. And so she turned around and she said, "Carrie, I would like to send you on an errand, even out in the rain." "Yes, you like the rain, don't you?" "I do. I like the puddles especially." Well, Carrie said, "Sure, but I won't be able to help with the bread." And her mother said, "But you'll get to go out." She said, "Okay, what's the errand?" "I would like you to go over to Mrs. Ambrose's and see if you can borrow a 3-handled rolling pin." And notice she raised one eyebrow when she said that, a 3-handled rolling pin. Well, Carrie already had her coat on and she was pulling up her rain boots and she was out the door in a flash. And it didn't take all that very long to get there because there weren't that many interesting puddles along the way. So she got to Mrs. Ambrose's house, and she was from Barbados. And the minute she walked in the door, she could smell the coconut bread. It was a wonderful thing. And Mrs. Ambrose took her on into the house. Carrie told her her errand. Mrs. Ambrose looked a little bit confused, but she sliced off an end of that coconut bread and poof, you could see the steam coming out of it. And Carrie just, oh, it was so good. It was so good. And then she says, "Well, I need to keep going. I need to run that errand for my mother." And Mrs. Ambrose gave her a hug and off she went. And this time she went to see her friend Rajit. They used to play kickball and all kinds of games together when it wasn't raining so hard. And she walked into their house and his mother was making chapatis. Well, that was the most delicious flatbread you made right in the frying pan. And of course, she had to have a taste of that too. But again, Rashid's mother did not have a three-handled rolling pin, and so she had to keep going. And she went back out and she went to another friend's house, Mark. And he was in the kitchen with his older sister, Anne Marie, and they were making cornbread. Now, they made their cornbread from scratch, no unpronounceable ingredients in it, everything from scratch. And they told her it was just as easy as buying that box. And they were right, it tasted a whole lot better. So they were from South Carolina and they brought that recipe with them. But again, Anne Marie and Rajit's mother, they had no idea where their three-handled rolling pin was. They thought they had lent it to another relative, but they weren't sure. And so Carrie continued on her way and she went to her friend Amalia's house. Amalia lived above the Middle Eastern restaurant and bakery that her family owned, and they had lots and lots of kitchen utensils. So she thought, surely they would have a three-handled rolling pin. Well, when she got there, the grandmother, who was from Lebanon, met her at the door, and she spoke Arabic. She was kind of uncomfortable speaking English. Usually it was her children or her grandchildren who translated for her. So they let her in and she went into the kitchen and no one had a three-handled rolling pin, but what they did have was homemade pita. Now, pita bread, if you didn't know, when it comes out of the oven, it's like a balloon. It's only after it begins to settle that it looks like the pita we know in the store. But this was homemade, so you could see where it came from. And they were dipping it in hummus. Now, the only hummus that Carrie had ever had, they had bought at the store in a little plastic tub. But she saw that this came right out of their food processor. And there were these beans. She learned they were chickpeas sitting right there. They used that. And the best part was they drizzled some olive oil on it with some red peppers. And it was the most delicious thing, almost more delicious than all of the other bread she had already had. But still, no three-handled rolling pin. And so she continued on her way. And she was walking around the neighborhood and she forgot that there was an area where the puddles got really, really big. And she was just walking along and she heard a voice from behind her, a small voice saying, "Look out, Carrie." And sure enough, a truck came along and ran right through the biggest puddle of all, and she was soaked. Even with her rain boots and her coat on, she was soaked to the skin. Well, that little voice came from Mrs. Mack. And Mrs. Mack was all dressed up because it was Saturday and that was her Sabbath. And she says, "Come home with me, come home. We'll have a cup of tea, dry off, and I have a treat for us." And so they went in and Mrs. Mack made them tea and she used beautiful teacups and saucers from the old country, she called it. And she made them tea and she brought out this bread. It looked a lot like her mother's Italian bread. It was all kind of braided together, but it was yellow and it was sweet. And Mrs. Mack explained that it was what they called challah. And challah was made with lots of eggs and sugar, and it was so delicious. She honestly, even though her head was wrapped up in a towel, she held that teacup in her lap and it was warm and cozy and the bread tasted so good. And even though it had been raining for at least a year, even though it had been raining for so long and she'd been stuck inside, that bread and that tea tasted better than just about anything. And she asked Mrs. Mack, she said, this all started because my mom sent me out to find a three-handled rolling pin. Do you have one you can lend to us? Well, Mrs. Mack looked at her and she raised that eyebrow too. And she said, And then she looked at Carrie and she said, what would you use the third handle for? Carrie just sat there for a minute and she thought, and she went, oh, oh. And Mrs. Mack said, yes, you were getting in her hair, weren't you? I guess I was. She sent me out on this errand. I guess I was. But that's okay, because I got all of this different bread. It was wonderful, and every bit of it was homemade. And I learned about different people's foods and their countries. And I'm telling you, the taste of everything, doesn't matter what it was all wonderful. And so she went back home, and her mom was busy, not paying a whole lot of attention, didn't even ask about that 3-handled rolling pin. And Carrie looked at her and she said, you know, couldn't find a 3-handled rolling pin anywhere. Now, Mrs. Mack did say that she had a 3-legged ladle if you wanted to borrow that. And her mother looked at her, and they raised their eyebrows at each other, and they laughed and they hugged. And Carrie's mom says, okay, it's lunchtime. Let's sit down. Carrie went, what? Lunch? I'm so full. I can't eat anything. And that was perfectly okay. Because you know what? The title of this story is Everybody Bakes Bread. And so ends our story.
Thank you, Marguerite. Oh, so many kinds of bread. I'm hungry now. You may know that we share every Sunday's collection with an organization whose work outside our walls aligns with our values. Our Share the Plate partner for the month of July is Open Table Nashville, a nonprofit interfaith community that disrupts cycles of poverty, journeys with the marginalized, and provides education about issues of homelessness. You can learn more in the worship portal at firstuunash.org, where you can also find the link to our online donation form. As always, your gifts, like your presence among us, are received with gratitude. Oh, thank you, Holly. That was lovely. I invite you all now to finish arriving here together with this gathered congregation and realize two things. One, that whatever space you're in right now, whenever you are, you have created a holy place and a holy time simply by being there. And also, we are connected to each other through the miracle of the internet and through many, many other forces. We are connected always to each other, to people who are not here, to our ancestors, to our descendants, to the earth, and all the other creatures who inhabit the earth alongside us. So know yourself here, now, in this place, to be connected. And let us join in a spirit of prayer. Life and love that surrounds us always and everywhere, known by so many names and comprehended by none of them. We are grateful for this opportunity to practice connection, to reflect upon it, to consider what it gives, the gifts we enjoy, and also the responsibilities that it brings. May we use this time together to be nourished, to be challenged, to encourage each other to move forward from this place of connection, knowing that there are connections that can never be broken, and that we are in this together, in this life, in this world, walking on this earth, moving, standing, sitting, rolling, all together, connected in life and in love, and moving toward a world filled with more justice and more peace for every bit that is connected. Blessed be. Amen. May it be so.
So for our meditation, I'm going to do something a little unusual and ask you all to take a moment and go to your kitchen and get a small piece of food, like a raisin or a nut or a baby carrot, cherry tomato, small piece of food if you can. Great. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So as we wait for everyone to come back, those of you who are already back can begin by exploring this food with your sense of smell. Give it a little sniff. What do you notice? It'll probably be very subtle. Welcome back, everyone. As you're coming back, we're giving our little morsel a little sniff. Explore it with your sense of smell. What do you notice? Then your sense of touch. Explore the texture. Think about where this tiny piece of food came from. What is it made of? How did it get like that? Think of how amazing it is that things could evolve to be this shape. Now, take your first small bite. Don't eat all of it if you can. Your first small bite, chew slowly, noticing the actual sensory experience of chewing and tasting. You don't need to think about your food to experience it. You can close your eyes if you'd like to focus on the sensations of chewing, tasting, swallowing. Notice if the intensity of the food's flavor changes moment to moment. Now, if you can take a second bite, finish it off. What do you notice this time? Does it taste different now that you had gotten a little flavor bonus ahead of time? Check in with your body. Is your tongue tingling with flavor? Is your stomach gurgling with anticipation for brunch? Feel what does it feel like to have just taken one little bite of something? As the line between you and that small morsel of food begins to dissolve within you, as that piece of food starts to become you, consider the journey that it has been on. Where might it have grown? Where was it made? By whom? By taking those two tiny bites, you are now connected to all those places, those people, those sources of nourishment, those water sources, the sun. Now that you are together, where will you go? What is your commitment to them in return? Thank you all for doing a little meditation on a morsel with me. We'll just take a quick moment of silence before we go into the sermon. So I wrote this sermon for the Unitarian Universalist Office at the United Nations Greeley Sermon Competition. I just want to acknowledge them because I was very honored to have won that with this, and I'm very excited to share it with you all this morning. Okay. When the pandemic began changing our lives, a long year and a half ago, I lost work, as many did. Like many, I turned to my community's food pantry called Arlington Eats here in Massachusetts. The food they safely delivered to my home was surprising in both quality and quantity. Bok choy, in addition to boxed mac and cheese. However, having grown up on freezer food and microwave meals, I was a little mystified by the less processed items. Though I'm Mexican American, I realized I had no idea what to do with a simple bag of dried beans. I had received generous help from the food pantry, but I needed a bit more to make use of their gifts. As grad students are wont to do, I began researching and found an incredible cookbook called Decolonize Your Diet: Plant-Based Mexican American Recipes for Health and Healing. In it, author Luz Calvo informed me that cooking a pot of beans from scratch is a revolutionary act that honors both our ancestors and future generations. Stuck in my house, feeling small and useless as the crises of 2020 compounded on each other, I began to learn that food was one of the few things keeping me connected to people, power, and the planet. In 2011, Unitarian Universalists adopted a statement of conscience called ethical eating, on which the UU office at the UN centered last year's intergenerational spring seminar. The statement explained that the current American food culture harms the environment, animals, and humanity. Of course, humans are animals, which are in turn part of the environment. So in other words, we could say that our food culture is harming Earth's entire interdependent web of being. Let's take a deeper look at these harms. First, the parts of the environment commonly considered non-sentient: the soil, water, and air. Fertilizers and over-farming degrade and erode the soil, making it harder for vegetation to take root and grow healthily. Pesticides and factory processes pollute the water. Methane and fuel emissions from our globalized food system choke the air. These in turn harm wildlife of the land, sky, and sea, increasing extinction rates and decreasing biodiversity. But our food culture most directly harms the livestock inside of it. Most of us have seen videos of the sickening conditions that cows, pigs, and chickens are subject to in concentrated animal feeding operations, also known as factory farms. The waste from these facilities runs off to pollute the local environment. The antibiotics and hormones injected into the animals to keep them alive and profitable negatively affects the humans who eat them. The humans directly in contact with our food production system are also harmed. From migrant farmers to slaughterhouse laborers to workers on the factory floor, illness and injury are more common than the healthcare needed to treat them. But for those of us who eat the food, the harm is no less real. In his book, Food Rules, Michael Pollan writes of 2 facts on which all the squabbling sides of nutrition science agree. Fact 1, populations that eat a so-called Western diet, generally defined as a diet consisting of lots of processed foods and meat, lots of added fat and sugar, lots of refined grains, lots of everything except vegetables, fruit, and whole grains, invariably suffer from high rates of the so-called Western diseases, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. Fact 2, populations eating a remarkably wide range of traditional diets generally don't suffer from these chronic diseases. The harmful Western diet disproportionately affects the poor and brown peoples to whom it is historically new. Calvo, the co-author of Decolonize Your Diet, writes that, quote, immigrant Latinas had significantly lower rates of breast cancer than US-born Latinas. Moreover, the longer Latina immigrants lived in the US, the higher their risk for developing breast cancer. In Winona LaDuke's book, Recovering the Sacred, she notes, quote, by the end of the 20th century, 1 in 8 Native Americans had diabetes, a rate that is twice that of the non-Indian population, end quote. Food, which should be life-giving, is killing us. And by poisoning food, we are killing life itself. In the film First Reformed, a despairing environmental activist asks his pastor, will God forgive us for what we've done to this planet? For some of us, the web of being might be a more resonant idea than God, but what of forgiveness? Can the earth, the water, the plants, animals, the sky forgive us? Can we forgive us? And before forgiveness, what of contrition? An apology is needed. With acknowledgement of the wrong, amends made, and intention set not to repeat the harm. How can humanity apologize to the earth? I know that the magnitude of the entire climate crisis often feels too vast and overwhelming for me amid all the other immediate cares of my life. This is why the food ecosystem is the key. Every single one of us thinks about and hopefully has access to food on a daily basis. We are all involved with the situation, which means we can affect the remedy. In his book on practicing Islam while protecting the planet, Ibrahim Abdul Matin writes, quote, food is where the management of water, waste, and energy intersect to provide nourishment for our minds, bodies, and souls, end quote. It is the connection between every strand of the web, the point on which the circle of life turns. Since we are what we eat, food can help us become who we want to be. As written in Decolonize Your Diet, La comida es medicina. Food is medicine. Lorelei Decora, a Native American nurse and activist, writes, quote, before we can start talking about nutrition, we have to renew the spiritual connection our people had with food as a gift from the Creator, end quote. Food practices, like many of those that Marguerite named in her story, like the challah on the Sabbath, and many held holy since before recorded history, can lead us back to harmony with all that is. Unitarian Universalist efforts to slow and reverse climate change are admirable, wonderful. We are definitely ahead of the curve. But where, I wonder, is our communal spiritual relationship to food? Some congregations may celebrate Passover, like I know Fun does. We might have a weekly dinner or host the occasional farmer's market. But I'll point out that there's no faith-wide understanding of that which we all share, the need for and enjoyment of good, healthy, sustainable food. However, there is a glimmer right here among the Unitarian Universalists. Reverends Aisha Ansano and Emily Conger have co-founded Nourish Dinner Church Consultants to help UU churches create worship services centered around a meal. As Reverend Aisha says, it's all about nourishing bodies and spirits through food and ritual. Tuning our values into our food enlivens both our physical selves and our work for justice. Lucky for us, food justice is also an incredible avenue for dismantling white supremacy, thereby making this not just a struggle against climate change, but for climate justice. Predominantly white, well-off Unitarian Universalists can support our Indigenous neighbors as they fight against corporate seed patenting, overfishing, and land theft. For example, in New York, a group of white folks purchased farmland and gifted it back to the Haudenosaunee tribe from which it had been stolen hundreds of years before. That land now houses a flourishing organic farm and community center. Speaking of growing food, we can support Latinx migrant workers to gain adequate pay, citizenship, and industry standards, which poison neither farmers nor consumers. Cesar Chavez was an incredibly important civil rights activist, specifically working with farm workers and food, and boycotting certain foods was the method they used to enact change. And like in Detroit, even food deserts can become oases of interracial coalitions for urban gardening. We can follow the lead of Jewish and Muslim communities who are thoughtful about how livestock is killed, like in the Islamic practice of humane zabiha. What might a Unitarian Universalist version of kosher look like? Think of it, a creative, intercultural food tradition of our very own, which adheres to our principles. Because let's face it, the way most of us eat right now, the way the system encourages us to eat, is not faithful. It does not treat every person, much less all life, with inherent worth and dignity. It is neither just nor equitable. It moves us away from, rather than towards, a peaceful and free world community. And it blatantly, cruelly abuses and neglects the web of all being, of which we sometimes forget that we are a part. This is a systemic problem, which every individual can affect with our day-to-day choices. I suggest making this a spiritual practice, a way to return yourself to that which is of ultimate concern: well-being, family, community, and our incredible planet. If you are fortunate enough to have access to bountiful, healthy food, it is your responsibility to make it just as accessible to those around you. Who knows? You might even feed a hungry grad student through your local food pantry. While I am certainly grateful to the food pantry that helped me survive 2020, I do not want to live in survival mode forever. I'm the mixed race queer daughter of a divorced, impoverished mom. Like many, I grew up eating as much cheap, easy food as I could get. I've struggled with body image issues and eating disorders. You could say that our culture is struggling with an eating disorder. Slowly, I'm learning that what I eat matters. Integrating with my body and being mindful of my food practices improves my mental, spiritual, and physical health. Beyond my individual health, food practices connect me to mi gente, my people, and the planet. Though I barely know how to boil beans, I'm committed to reaching out and trying better. Are you? I know all of us who are gathered this morning eat and engage with the food system differently. If you are currently eating mostly processed food, like me, how might we begin to return to real food that our great-great-grandmothers would recognize? Even an inexpensive pot of beans might begin a little revolution. If you already support farmers markets and eat as locally as you can, how might you begin to make such food available to marginalized people whose resources limit them to cheap, fast, toxic foods? Food insecurity has dramatically increased this past year. Nashville has several lovely organizations working to address it, like Open Table Nashville and Second Harvest, with many wonderful options you can help support. If you're already working with or supporting food justice organizations, perhaps you might foster coalitions between them so that they may, perhaps, begin to advocate for changing the food system at its root. And if you, like me, are one of the people struggling with food insecurity, how might you accept the help you need with joy for your community's interconnectedness, rather than the shame our bootstrap culture tries to impose? And for all of us, what spiritual practices like mindful eating or Passover or weekly dinners with our communities can we foster to remind ourselves of the sacred importance of the humble food which becomes our amazing bodies? No matter who you are or how you eat, I encourage you to commit to one small positive change in your food ways. Because our every molecule is composed of the air, water, and food we consume. By these, we are related to everything else on this once and future beautiful planet. When we disregard or disrupt that sacred connectedness, we directly harm ourselves and our world. But when we honor and nourish the medicinal ecosystem of food, the soil will moisten and darken. The waters will clear and flow. The air will dance and cleanse. Our beloved Earth has the capacity. It has recovered before. If we restore what we have harmed, all will heal and flourish. Change the food, change the world. Please make it so.
I can think of no better way to end this service with our closing song, the Welsh tune Hyfrydol, recast with lyrics by singer-songwriter Peter Mayer. Peter's lyrics capture the hearts of UUs the world over and capture this sermon with Blue Boat Home. I hope you will join with Holling on piano and singers from both Nashville UU's choir and Northlake UU's choir in Washington as we lift our voices in song.
Far away from the road.
I have put the words to our chalice extinguishing in the chat. Please join me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. With thanks to Elizabeth Sell Jones for those words.
Our benediction is a quote from Grace Lee Boggs, who was an Asian American anti-racist activist in Detroit who led just an incredible urban gardening scene that is still going today. We can begin by doing small things at the local level, like planting community gardens or looking out for our neighbors. That is how change takes place in living systems, not from above, but from within, from many local actions occurring simultaneously.